Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to talk about the defense from that Lions game. And honestly, sometimes there's one good show and there's one show that's just not as good. This week, they're both going to be a lot of fun. And making it that much more fun is I'm joined by Jonas Schaefer from the Baltimore Banner. Jonas, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. Great to be back on.
Always, it's been way too long. Jonas used to be the lead writer at the Baltimore Sun. And for football, anyway, and that's what I think of you. I don't know what your actual title was, beat writer, I guess. Yeah. But outstanding guy. I think in terms of the Suns' progression and how much the analysis component improved, I really traced that back to when they hired you. And I thought Jeff was and is great. A tremendous reporter of news, has his pulse on a hand on the pulse and whatnot, but really appreciate all the additional analysis you brought to the Sun when you were there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest difference between Jeff and I is that I will use DVOA and he has no use for the subject, but different strokes for different folks. Some folks love count and stats. Some folks love opponent adjusted, esoteric averages. And that's me.
All right. Very good. Well, I'm sure have fun talking about all kinds of things on this show. Thoroughly dominant performance, not just on the scoreboard. It was every bit as dominant on the field, I thought, in this game. The Ravens, again, brought it home with a 4-man pass rush. We'll get into a lot of this. What are you taking from this in terms of it's a very staid defensive game plan, very basic. And yet it's working so well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's basic in the sense that, they're not relying on the Wink Martindale level of blitzes, but the ways that Mike Macdonald can get to a 4-man pass rush and not have it compromise the integrity of his coverage plan or his run fits is, I think, what separates him from your, run-of-the-mill defensive coordinator here. I mean, I forget if it was, and I'm sure we'll get to all the crazy stuff that he schemed up in this game, but I'm still thinking about the dropping of Broderick Washington and Travis Jones as Arthur Milet screams off the corner on a slot blitz, which is effectively, I think it turned out to be a 4-man pressure package, but it was not something that you would see in JV football. That's something you can only run with an elite coordinator and very, very good players who are totally bought in. So, when we, kind of poked around the Ravens before the season, I think there was a wanting on the behalf of John Harbaugh to be more aggressive. I always kind of go back to him. He did like a conference call during the Wink Martindale days where either he himself referred to himself as like the third Ryan brother, or the columnist who was writing the story referred to himself as the third Ryan brother, because he was, comes from that Jim Johnson school in Philadelphia, which is just pressure, blitz. And I think it's so fascinating that he has been totally accepting of this Mike Macdonald style where it's bend but don't break. We're not going to blitz more than 25% of the time in a game. We're still going to have those cover zero, humdingers just coming straight down the barrel at you. But he is totally comfortable basically doing a complete 180 from the head coach of the defense that was blitzing more than 50% of the time. And lo and behold, it's absolutely working, and everyone on this team is totally bought in.
Yeah, it's been really special. And the play you're talking about was a 4-3 blitz, as I call it. It means he get the 4 in the end, but he had 3 drop from the line of scrimmage, including Patrick Queen. I think you had it exactly right. That it was Washington and Travis Jones dropped.
As I was thinking of it, a third of a ton of football beef dropping at the line of scrimmage. Just, you don't really see guys plural of that size dropping, but it worked, man.
So you were covering the team in 2021 when they played the Dolphins in that 40 cover 0 blitz game.
Yeah.
So when they lost down there, Adam Butler, their nose tackle, dropped 18 times in that game. 18 times from a nose tackle. But they knew how to play it in terms of rush the edges, but leave some people without dance partners in the middle of the field, and that was very effective. Unfortunately, that game against the Ravens.
Is there a name? I should probably know this as someone who covers the NFL, but is there a name for that type of engagement where just you are throwing your hands into the center or the guard, and then as soon as that contact is engaged and they're occupied for that split second, you're actually
simulated pressure, I think, is the term you're looking for. It's when
I think, yeah, I mean, like I'm just talking about the actual component of a simulated pressure, like when you are basically doing the bare minimum to get that opposing lineman's attention, and then you're backing up. I remember asking Wake Martindale about it, like when he was still DC, and he didn't really have an answer for it, or he was giving a cute answer that was of no help to me. But I just think it's fascinating, not only just the active, but the etymology of some of these, football terminology, like there's the coffee house stunt or whatever, where it's like you're pretending to leave and you're coming back around and surprising the offensive lineman. But yeah, I mean, it's just really exciting to see any defense do that successfully, and for the Ravens to, I think, really tick it up in this game was really effective and smart.
That'd be a very good question for a player, is what do you call it when you hand check your opponent before dropping? And I think that's what you're really asking here. Because if it's just a straight drop from the line of scrimmage, it is still effective because it leaves people on the interior wondering, who am I going to block? And they look for work to the outside, but they can't transfer that work one body at a time very efficiently. Certainly not in time to, get that unblocked edge rusher taken care of. So it's just the nature of football. You always got one more at the line of scrimmage that you can block if the other team wants it that way.
Yeah, and that was what was so interesting about that Miami game, because it was just like they're going to do just enough to engage those offensive linemen that they are going to make it hell for the the running back or the outside tackles to block whoever it was that was coming. And the Ravens just didn't have a good strategy for that game. I mean, it is just kind of remarkable to think about how easily some teams have found strategies for that cover zero that cover zero strategy. Like I'm not sure, Ken, if you saw that crazy Vikings Chargers game from like a month ago, where it was like a 60% cover zero rate from Brian Flores versus Justin Herbert. And it was just like, I think the JT O'Sullivan, the QB school, calls that kind of birds on a wire strategy, where it just the defensive backs are on the exact same depth, just basically guarding that first down marker. And Justin Herbert and the Chargers just ate that day, because I think every single time that Minnesota showed that kind of pre-snap cover zero look, they would basically audible into like a quick hitting screen, where I think the inside receiver would block for the outside receiver, and you could have that real estate to make it work, because it was thrown quickly enough where you could, get it out ahead of that blitz. And you could also put yourself in a position where you're basically getting a one-on-one every single time, if not a more favorable advantage. And I think that was the game where Herbert had like 350 or 400 yards. And it's crazy to think that Greg Roman, over the course of 4 quarters, just couldn't come up with something as simple as that. And, that was the difference in that game. It's just one answer. And we're probably talking about the legacy of that game, I think, is very, very different.
Yeah, it's and they were ready for it the next week in terms of having some wide receiver screens and things to do. But the other thing is, and people don't realize how little time it takes to get this pass off. If you're used to timing the deep route, the old Walsh route, that you complete the pass to the receiver at 41 or 42 yards downfield, it only takes like right at 2 seconds to release. And even with cover zero, it's very hard to get the pressure in the court on top of the quarterback in that amount of time. So it's definitely doable to throw deep against that, and you're throwing into these single one-on-one coverages where 2 of the 3 events are bad for the defense. So it's certainly possible to beat it by throwing deep. You just have to throw a certain type of a ball with a lot of air under it and allow your receiver to go get it.
Yeah, I mean, there was that Sammy Watkins woulda, coulda, shoulda touchdown, right, in the first quarter, second quarter, where he seemed to pull up kind of near the back of the end zone. And if he catches that, I feel like they probably pull away and win rather easily and avoid a horrifically embarrassing loss. But he didn't, and they lost.
All right, let's come back to today here. The Ravens lead the NFL with 29 sacks. No one would have predicted this at the beginning of the season. If you did, show me the tweet because I want to see it. But it's obviously a team that has put together a very good schematic plan. But here's the question that keeps getting asked. Obviously, the trade deadline's coming up, and the Ravens may or may not make a move. I really dislike a lot of the possible moves, particularly those that involve cap space or draft capital, and almost all the moves involve one of those two things, unless there's a very low budget free agent that they could still pick up, which Ndamukong Suh might fit into that category. Are you of the opinion that the Ravens need a pass rusher at this point?
Not, I don't know. In the context of, if you have, like, I guess I would say, if the Super Bowl were this week and they had the option of going to get a pass rusher, then, but it would like cost them something severe next year. I guess I shouldn't say Super Bowl. If it was like the chance, if it was like a wild card game or a chance to win the AFC North, I would say no. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that, Adafe is coming back from that ankle injury, which means that he's probably at a greater risk for re-injury. And then you have Jadeveon Clowney, who I don't think anyone, certainly not me, expected to have as clean a bill of health as he has had this year. We don't know the Tyus Bowser situation. Not in love with what David Ojabo could do if and when he comes back later this season. So, I've got a story coming out tomorrow that just is the, classic reporter speculative trade deadline story, even though we're still, a week away from Halloween at this point. And like the kind of buy high option was, the obligatory Chase Young angle, just because he is a local kid. He's got 5 sacks. I think he's top 20 in win rate on ESPN. But then I think the more appealing, more sensible buy low option would be Carl Lawson, who is just not getting any snaps on that Jets pass rush. I think he's played in like 4 games. He's been a healthy scratch in 2 of them. Doesn't have overwhelming stats or really any stats to speak of. I think he doesn't have a sack or a tackle for a loss or a QB hit this year. But with his time in the AFC North, I think the Ravens coaches certainly know the caliber of pass rush that he has. And last year, I think he had 7 sacks and finished top 30 in PFF in total pressures among edge rushers. So it's not like he's that far off from being an impactful guy. And, just from a business perspective, if I'm his agent or if I'm Carl Lawson himself, I'm wanting to get out of New York, not only for the chance to play for a potential contender, but just to play on a defense with a less crowded depth chart. And, obviously you could say, well, how much space is there really for him? Well, it could open up awfully quick if some of these guys that we're talking about who have these injury histories get hurt again. So I think he's a very, very manageable base salary. And he's the kind of guy that you would spend, a 5th or a 6th round pick and on getting, even if it is for just that short-term rental.
I don't think I'd go that high. He's $3.7 million left on the cap for this year. So it's not a zero. But you have to figure out where you're adding on the margin to yourself. So he's designated pass rusher here, and that's pretty much what he's been his whole career, right? Hasn't been a run stopping guy as far as I can remember ever. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he's played the run a little bit better than I think. But I think primarily he's been in there for pass rush snaps. Looks like he's got
he looks like he's never played more than never more than 68% of the snaps for a team. And
that's a good percentage of snaps for an outside linebacker. But what the point I was making is that he's played about 2.2 to 1 pass to run snaps. So they've used him mostly situational.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of options out there. I think with, you can find little reasons to not like Van Noy because he's old, or Clowney because he's old and has an injury history, or Owe because he's coming back off injury, or Jabo is probably the most realistic. Is he's a guy who has never produced at the NFL level, not really, and he's hurt. Right. But the big 3 right now are pretty impressive. Harrison has been a pretty good run stopper as a 4th. And then they have Robinson, who's kind of a lottery ticket as a fifth. And honestly, I think they've got his snaps managed down properly right now to pretty close to nothing.
Yeah, and I really, really liked what I saw from Adafe, and the fact that that was his first game back from an ankle injury, and he presumably wasn't 100%. I think he might have been limited in his Wednesday practice last week. So obviously there still is that level of rehab that he has to complete. But that was a tremendous pair of bookend tackles, and he beat Decker for the one sack despite being tripped while he made his way to Jared Goff for that forced fumble, and then he showed that basketball background to kind of beat Penei Sewell with that kind of left to right crossover move and draw that holding penalty, I think in the third quarter or thereabouts.
Yep.
I love his growth as a player. I did a story on him like mid-August or so, where he acknowledged that he was basically for the first 2 years of his career trying to play a type of game that wasn't ultimately the best suited for him. He wants to be more of a speed to power guy, and I think it's interesting because he has been more effective, obviously, in these 2 full games that he's played. But I still think on that spectrum of, speed to power, he's probably more of the speed guy. Like he's not really making the kind of, cage rushes that we saw like Aiden Hutchinson do over and over again on Sunday. But, I would like to see the long arm more. I would like to see those bull rushes more from Owe, because he's got such a lean frame. So such a long frame. But hey, man, it's working for him. And who am I to tell him that how his approach to speed to power is the incorrect way to go about his game.
Yeah. We talked about this on the show, so people generally know my opinion, but I'll toss it out there once more, since I think you've done a very cogent argument for what you're talking about here. Is I really like any kind of compound move from Owe, because as long as he's fast in his get off, he can decide before the snap what his compound move is. He doesn't have to wait for the opponent to react, because he's always going to be faster than the opponent. And the tackle he plays against is always going to overreact to his first move because he's the lesser athlete. So all of the things that a great point guard can do in terms of Eurostep or whatever other compound moves there are, and Owe's got a terrific spin move. I was thinking Van Noy should be teaching Owe's spin move, but Owe has looked terrific on the spin move this season as well. I mean, in this last game, I thought he looked good.
Yeah, I'm trying to bring up right now. It's interesting that you mentioned that first step, because that was actually my problem with the descriptions of him as a like thoroughbred athlete when the Ravens drafted him coming out of Penn State, because obviously he had the 4.3, 4.4 speed, but when I looked at, and it doesn't look like I can, oh, there it is. When I looked at, his film, even from his best games, obviously he was playing on a very, very good, very talented Penn State line, but he was always, it seemed like, the last guy to
out of his stance
get off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what value is that 4.3, 4.4 speed if you are last out of the blocks? And credit to him, credit to the coaching staff. It seems like he is fixed something mentally, fixed something physically, but where now it is a much more even battle. And I have it right here. So it looks like his average, this is from Next Gen Stats, his average get off at the line of scrimmage. And again, this is like all down. So it's not sorted for just pass rush downs, but it is, so it's not great. It's 0.97, which is like slower than Tavius Robinson, slower than Justin Madubuike. Some of that might be situational, just him crossing the line of scrimmage to stop a run. But I think from the eye test alone, from what we've seen on film, with the pressure that he's able to create coming off the edge, suggests that he's been able to hone that part of the game. And if you are trying to attack that half that half of the tackle that you need to kind of create those leverages for those next moves, those counters, then I think he's doing a great job of that.
Okay. All right. Well, great. One of the things that I think is kind of a big deal this week, the pitching line now, so to speak, is closed on the London game. Now, they still got a bye to benefit from later in the year. But if you kind of talk through what they did, they left early for London. They got practicing there. They acclimated to Greenwich Mean Time. They put in a thoroughly dominant effort against Tennessee that only added up to 8 points on the scoreboard. But, there's a lot of things to build on from that game that were positive. They came back, regular work day, didn't allow the players to get lost in Europe or Amsterdam or even in Las Vegas by having a week off here and coming back home. Started the work schedule again, got it going well again, and obviously played the most difficult opponent of the season and beat the crap out of them on Sunday. I think you got to look at the way they approached London as really one of the great organizational decisions of the year. And I'm kind of wondering, like, I haven't heard Harbaugh crow about it yet, but I got to believe, and this is what I really want to hear from you. Do you think he was the organizational force behind it, or was he just perhaps a gatekeeper in deciding that it would be done that way?
I think he has tremendous sway on matters like that. So I do think that, everyone before that London game did the expected story on like, oh, the Ravens are going to London earlier now after the disaster of 2017.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think there was just, we talked to him before the week before they left, and he said that, everyone in our football department was looking for studies or research about whether it was actually advantageous to leave for London earlier, or to leave for, overseas trips earlier, and that they couldn't really find anything. But they just figured that, hey, if it went as poorly as it did the last time, with us leaving as late as we did the last time, which, obviously ended up with players literally falling asleep on the 45-minute bus ride from the team hotel to the stadium the morning of the game. I mean, players like openly admitting that they were just so out of whack sleep-wise, circadian rhythm-wise. I think it absolutely made sense. And, I think Harbaugh, if the Ravens were to do this all again, and I imagine they probably will, although, who knows what the timeline for that next trip will be, would absolutely follow the same model that they're doing right now. I don't know, obviously depending on when that next international trip might fall in their schedule. I don't know if they would do what they're doing this season with preferring not to take the bye right after and kicking that can down the road a little bit, because obviously we are still only coming up on week 8 right now. But I do think that they did everything right, like you said, Ken. And I think Harbaugh was asked about it, about the London situation after the game on Sunday. I'm just looking at the quotes right now. That he said, you love it as a coach. That's how they feel. That's how they go to work. I wasn't even thinking about it, but everybody kept asking me about not taking the bye or whatever. There you go. So they felt like they were locked in coming back from London, and they absolutely looked like it.
Yep. And now they in some ways, the Ravens earlier this year in particular looked like they could really use another bye week now, but they did actually get a lot of their players back. But now that week 12 bye is looking mighty juicy in terms of coming into the right time before a playoff run. They're going to have actually a pretty tough schedule, I think, down the stretch that they've got to make their way through. And I think that having the bye there should really help them.
Yeah. And I completely forgotten about this little quirk of their schedule until someone mentioned it, or I read it, but just the fact that, obviously going into the bye week with Seattle, losing Uchenna Nwosu is a blow for them in their pass rush and a very, very impressive defense. But that's a game that's easier than it was yesterday. Yeah. Deshaun Watson, we don't know if he's going to be on IR for that week 10 game, but again, that's in Baltimore. Week 11, Cincinnati. That should be a really, really fun game Thursday night. So I think it defies all conventional analysis, because again, it is a Thursday night game. And then, that Week 12 game against the Chargers, who knows if Brandon Staley is even going to be the coach at that point, but that is just a terrible Chargers defense that seems beyond salvaging. But all of which is to say, I've completely forgotten that you go November 26th game, bye week, December 10th game. And so you have, what is it, like 2 games in a span of, if you kind of use the window of that Jacksonville game, like a span of 20 something days, right? I mean, it is a very, very favorable, advantageous schedule that the Ravens have.
They have the Rams and the Jags between the Chargers and the 49ers.
Yeah. Just, I mean, like, I forget exactly how someone kind of, twisted the math on it, but just the fact that they are going to have that long break from the Thursday game.
Got it. Okay.
To LA, and then you have the bye week, and then you have the regular, Rams game. And who knows what that Rams team is going to look like. Obviously, Matthew Stafford is kind of a walking injury risk if he keeps on getting hit. But that offense is a lot to like. But it's going to be a tough schedule for sure. I think they're number 3 in future strength of schedule on FTN with their DVO rankings, and I think ESPN has them about the same. So it's going to be interesting. But I think if they can get to the bye with at least 9 wins, maybe 8 wins on their ledger, they should feel pretty good about where they are in the playoff race.
Yeah, 9 would do it for sure. That's 4-1. That's a big tall order, but it would be great. Hey, and yeah. Honestly, they probably are going to be favored in every one of these games. They're at home versus Cleveland and Cincinnati. And I see what you're saying about the Chargers road trip in Week 12. That's the way to take a West Coast road trip, when you have 10 days before and 2 weeks after. That's you're gonna fly west and come back east. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be putting camp in LA, but I wouldn't mind if they did.
Let's keep it moving here.
So
I want to ask you this. It was a very, very dominant win, obviously, but what do you take as the single biggest occurrence or positive portent from this game that we can take?
Oh man, I guess just that in this chess match that we were all expecting between 2 aspiring grandmasters of their respective crafts, and Ben Johnson and Mike Macdonald, that Mike Macdonald had checkmate within 8 moves. It was just it did not take long for him to basically show that he had an answer for every single little wrinkle that this Lions offense had, working for it. I mean, it's not an overly talented Lions offense, at least in terms of skill position players. I mean, Sam Laporta, I thought looked great on Sunday. I was really impressed by him. Amon-Ra St. Brown is obviously just a fiend over the middle, and that line, when it's healthy, is fantastic, but not a whole lot of game breakers on that team, and they were still very, very productive. And I think the way that Mike Macdonald and this defense and the way that they bought in were just able to show that this is a Lions team with relatively unexceptional athletes at the skill position players, aside from Jameson Williams. And he's not really, the kind of game breaker that we all thought he would be coming into the draft. I think the way that they were just kind of able to level the playing field athletically, tilted in their favor, and then just force the Lions into, uncomfortable situation after uncomfortable situation. I mean, the three straight 3-and-outs to open the game just kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it?
That was wonderful. I thought the fact that all of the things that had worked against quote unquote lesser quarterbacks, and I'm going to include Burrow in that group because he's not an arm strength guy. So he's a guy who is going to fall victim to cover 2 and not being willing to throw into the teeth of it. And when he did, he was terrible. At 15 yards plus, he was 0 of 7 with interception for a 0 passer rating. So you come to this game, and Jared Goff playing outdoors, first of all, I have high hopes for that being a bad Jared Goff day. And we had some wind. It wasn't as much wind as it didn't really feel windy where I was sitting. I'll put it that way. Not terribly windy, but you did see it on the field goals, so the uprights moving a little bit on the day. That's usually bad for Jared Goff. It is also bad for Lamar Jackson, and it's bad that the Ravens lose a kicking advantage that they have. But Goff really looked impacted by it. And I thought maybe the fact that the Ravens are playing cover 2, and they start with that a lot, even if they rotate out of it, or they do different things from it, or use matchup zones on both sides. Whatever they do from cover 2 might be different, but they start with that, and it really discourages waiting for longer plays to develop down the field. And the Ravens have just been very effective at forcing teams to go short. Amon-Ra, St. Brown had a great game, but had a lot of targets, 19 in the game for 102 yards. That doesn't really work out to being a great weapon. That's 5.4 yards per target. You wouldn't want that out of your quarterback, so I don't know why you'd want it out of your receiver. And there's a few balls in additionally that had to be thrown away because of the shortness and might have otherwise been intended for him. He was a guy you certifiably do not want to be in trail coverage against Amon-Ra St. Brown, because he will beat you, and Goff will get the ball to him, generally speaking. But it's not a great, if that's your biggest weapon that you have, the Ravens will make you make a mistake before you get all the way down the field on them.
Yeah, I think part and parcel of the Amon-Ra St. Brown discussion is just how important the middle of the field was going to be in this game. I remember I think I wrote this in my preview column, like according to the next gen stats data, Jared Goff had completed like 78% of his passes over the middle coming into the game, which, for fans of Lamar Jackson, kind of makes sense. Like, that is the easiest part of the field to complete passes to, especially when you have a great run game, when you can set up a play action to just have those easy little passes, behind the linebackers, in front of the safeties, sure hands. You've got yourself a really, really nice foundation for an offense, but they just completely took it away. I think I have the stats right here. Every single game before Sunday, Goff had a positive EPA when targeting the middle of the field. He finished the game, Sunday's game, 10 for 13, which is like, again, to your point, kind of fake stats, for 75 yards, 1 interception, a 58.2 passer rating, minus 0.49 EPA per dropback, which is terrible. And that in itself is somewhat misleading, because a lot of that was helped by the fakeness of that fourth quarter. Because if you isolate it just to the first 3 quarters, he was 5 for 8 for 40 yards. He had that interception to Geno Stone, a 35.4 passer rating, and then a minus 0.83 EPA per dropback. So every single time, terrible. He dropped back and even thought about, testing Geno Stone over the middle, or Roquan Smith over the middle, or Patrick Queen over the middle. He was basically costing the Lions a point. So credit to the Ravens defense, the run defense, for, putting themselves in a situation where they didn't have to worry too much about play action. And obviously credit to the offense for, putting themselves up where the Lions weren't really in a spot where running the ball or using play action made a whole lot of sense. But then also, just credit to the secondary and the run defense for doing everything that they could to take away those easy buttons for Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, that Lions offense.
Here's my Jared Goff stat for the day here. Is Goff dropped back and ended up with a passer sack on 58 plays. He only got 7 balls to 15 or more yards. And even if you drop that back to 10, it looks like you add maybe another 7 to that, between 10 and 15 yards. So almost everything he threw, like 44 out of 58, was under 10 yards. The bulk of those were complete, but just not an impressive set of passes. The Ravens were generally keeping it all in front of them later in that game during garbage time, when they accumulated most of their snaps and most of their passes. They really, and garbage time began in quarter two in this game with the 28-0 lead. But they were really playing, basically to make tackles 3 to 5 yards from the line of scrimmage on a lot of plays, and were very effective doing it. It was great to see that basically the scheme that had worked with a lot of bad quarterbacks work with a quarterback who's having an MVP caliber season coming into the game.
Yeah, and they did a good job of, again, it's tough to sort just how this coverage distribution fell, because of you don't really know when certain calls were made, but just a really impressive like volatility or versatility in the amount of in the types of coverages that they use. Just again, this is the next gen stats data. I think the split, the single high versus two high was pretty close to 50-50. Cover 3, 29.3% of the dropbacks. Again, this is passes that were attempted, so it's not accounting for the 5 sacks that Goff took. Cover 4, 25.9%. Cover 1, 15.5%, which I think is actually probably a little bit low for the Ravens, considering just how much they like to blitz. Cover 6, 15.5%. Cover 2, 10.3%. Cover 0, 3.4%. So this is not like a Gus Bradley type system where you can expect one coverage to predominate, and it's like cover 3, 60, 70% of the time. I mean, it just must be hell for any quarterback, any coordinator to see as many pre-snap looks as the Ravens showed, and know that what they are showing you before the snap could be very, very, very different right after it.
The point I want to make with regard to that, and it's great information, by the way, is that the Ravens can rotate out a lot of ways, but what they show you pre-snap is typically 2 deep safeties. It's more often than not. That's not a pre-snap look you're talking about. That's what they rotated into, is whether it's single high or cover 3 or whatever. And obviously cover 3 is something you rotate into. You don't show cover 3 at the snap, other than a good quarterback can figure out if you're probably going to drop both cornerbacks. You don't necessarily show up. But Hamilton is a very versatile piece. I wish he didn't have to play deep safety. I think he'd be a lot more valuable to the Ravens as the nickel. If they had, if it could be Stone and Williams back there, that'd be great. I'll say this: I think there's a snowball's chance in hell they're going to get Geno Stone off the field the rest of the season. I think he basically plays every snap the rest of the way. So the question will be, can they really find him a pairing on the back end? DHC is not the guy, but it could be Adams, who's been a better cover guy more recently, that could allow them.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Guys, I've shared moving. I was using this for all my meals. Now I'm working from home. Guess what? Microwaves in the other room. I'm using this for all my meals. Factor is how I get through my lunch day every day. But they've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I haven't tried the breakfast ones yet, but why not? I think I might add that to my next order. But I love them for lunch. Plus, they've got new autumn fall flavors out right now for limited time, featuring seasonal veggies like cranberry, pecan chicken, and apple Dijon pork chops. And again, just like everything else, they're ready in just 2 minutes. They'll satisfy your fall cravings during this busy season without the hassle. So go ahead and level up with Gourmet Plus options as well. Prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccoli, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use the code Ravens50 to get 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off your Factor meal today.
To revert to cover 3, Mollett has been serviceable in the amount of time. So he's pretty good in this game, but I would much rather have Hamilton up at that nickel spot.
Yeah. Whenever I think about like the Ravens' plans for Kyle Hamilton and how things have shifted so many times already, like especially when you think about Brandon Stevens and his journey from cornerback to safety, back to cornerback, and him being like maybe the best cover corner on the guy right now, just in terms of what the level that he's playing at. Like I think about what the Ravens' end game was if they had gotten that Adrian Amos deal done. Did you remember that during the summer? Mm-hmm. Like, was that an admission that they actually preferred to have Kyle Hamilton in the slot, keep him in the slot? Because, you know, when we talked to John Harbaugh, I think as early as the combine, they were already in the process of transitioning Kyle from that nickelback spot to the more conventional
strong safety,
deep safety or strong safety position. And then, you know, Chuck Clark gets hurt right as the Ravens are reportedly in talks to get that Adrian Amos deal done, and the Jets come over the top with a better offer for him, and they are able to sign him away. But I do wonder if it was Amos who was going to be basically ahead of Geno Smith on the ahead of Geno Stone on the depth chart there, and pair him with Marcus Williams, and that frees up Kyle Hamilton just to just be your wild card. Again, just kind of an interesting sliding doors moment in what could have been for this Ravens secondary, and we shouldn't begrudge it because they are one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I my point before the season was not that Hamilton should play nickel or should play strong safety. For sure. It's great to have a player who can play either. My point was they should probably try and give him one role where he's the highest possible chance to be a superstar, because the variance in his play and what you get at the top end is going to be much more than with Stone preseason, which boy, Stone now is a different animal entirely, or anybody that they had as a possibility in the slot. You know, it was Brandon Stevens and Ardarius Washington, and Millett had his chance. And now we're back to Millett again, kind of thing. Somebody else who was in there that I'm forgetting about as a slot possibility. Pepe. Anyway, yeah, but who'd you say? Pepe, yeah, of course. How did I forget that? But anyway, as the season rolled out, and Hamilton is unbelievable in that nickel role, gives you tremendous flexibility, because you're set up to play 11 or 12 personnel with Hamilton at the nickel. You're already set up. You don't have to change anything in terms of moving anybody. And you're as dangerous as you can be at preventing the deep pass if you have two guys like Stone and Williams back there who are, each a free safety in their own right, but a certifiable force or a brick wall as a pair of deep safeties on a play. So you kind of force the other team into the run, and then, well, hey, you've got Kyle Hamilton, a great tackler up front too, and he can rush the passer. It's a perfect situation. The other thing it did is it really reduced the role for the cornerbacks who, at camp, we're all biting our nails about, who the hell is going to play cornerback for the Ravens with Humphrey hurt.
Yeah. It's interesting just to think about like the value add of Kyle at that deep safety, free safety, strong safety position, whatever you want to call it, because it does kind of speak to just the quirk of human psychology, where we don't think too much about things that we don't see. And I remember writing last year, and then also asking Mike McDonald about this in training camp, just like, do you remember how god awful they were at limiting deep passes last year? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think they were among the worst in the NFL, just in terms of like EPA per target of 20 plus air yards. And this year, even though we haven't seen, other than that one game where Kyle Hamilton lined up in the slot and had the 3 sacks on Gardner Minshew, and, it reminded everyone that he can do just about whatever he wants on the football field. I don't have the stats pulled up right now, but I think for the first 5 weeks of the season, at least going into that Pittsburgh game, I think they'd allowed, you could probably kind of one hand the number of passes that they'd allowed beyond 20 plus air yards. And I think that's still pretty close to the case. I mean, it's still mind blowing that I think Pittsburgh doubled the number of 20 plus air yard completions that the Ravens had allowed. And it was Kenny Pickett of everyone on this Ravens schedule, the one, the least likely candidate to inflict the most damage on deep passes. But I guess, he knows what he's doing with George Pickens. So it is, I think we should give credit to Kyle Hamilton for what he's been able to do to stabilize the back end and just discourage all manner of deep passes. While also acknowledging that, he certainly is more fun when he's just that hybrid overhang defender, just sticking his nose in there as a run defender, matching up against tight ends or the Josh Downs of the world. And of course, just everyone loves to see him blitz, even though he hadn't had a single sack in the NFL or had a single sack in football until he came to the Ravens.
Yeah. That was certainly a lot of fun. I did want to hit you up on one tweet. We're running really long here. I just want to kind of speed up a little bit. But you had a quote about the number,
sure.
A tweet about the percentage of defensive snaps resulting in TDs.
Yeah, let me bring that up. So this is from True Media, which is a great resource and one that I have access to through a friend. Not breaking any news here that it is. You want a defense that limits touchdowns, and the Ravens are doing a fantastic job at that. This is since 2000, they have the lowest rate of touchdowns allowed per drive. So 7.5% of opponents are converting their drives into touchdowns. The next best in the 23 years. In that 23-year sample size is the 2000 Ravens, who were at 8.2%. Number 3, also those 2000 Tennessee Titans at 9%. So they are 1.5% better than any non-Ravens team in that list. I thought it was notable because this was finally a test worthy of, sharing a stat like that, because if you consider just the whatever the opposite of a gauntlet of is for opposing quarterbacks and opposing offenses that they face, like it's not really a huge accomplishment that they have held the Gardner Minshew's of the world, or the Dorian Thompsons of the world, or the CJ Stroud in career start number 1 of the world to very, very few touchdowns. But I do think it is exceptional that even when these offenses are marching into the red zone, the Ravens are bowing up and saying, all you get is a field goal and you'll be happy with it. And if that level of proficiency is maintained throughout the entire season, then they're not going to need their offense to be better than like league average to basically have a shot at winning every single one of these games. I mean, Patrick Queen, I asked him in the locker room after Sunday's game if this defense knows literally how many touchdowns they've allowed this season. And he said, yeah, we do. And I asked him, how many? And he said 7. I was like, I didn't want to be the well actually guy, Ken, but it had to be, because one of those 7 touchdowns was
special teams.
Charlie Jones, punt return touchdowns. It's like, actually it's only 6, which is just pretty incredible.
Yeah. The 2000 Ravens gave up 3 that were not on the defense, 2 on pick sixes by Tennessee, and 1 in the Super Bowl on the kickoff return. But that team was also really special. It's a team that is thought of as being one that really benefited from a cupcake schedule during the regular season. That's not completely untrue. They did have a pretty easy schedule, but in the postseason, they played their best defense of the year, and that was against some freaking incredibly great offenses. And in particular, Denver, Oakland, and the Giants as well were riding a huge high when they played them, coming off a, I think, 41-0 win in the NFC Championship. So it was I'll just say the 2000 defense, I constantly been in fights with people who like the Bears 85, 86 defense. But the thing the Bears do, and this is something you always got to watch for, because they're always playing a shell game with you, is they want to pair the 1986 regular season Bears with the 1985 postseason Bears defense and say, oh, that's just one team. And no. Pick your team. You mean 85 or do you mean 86? And there's no question to me about which was the better defense. But anyway.
Yeah. Before my time.
All right, let's move on a little bit. We'll try and go a little quicker. We talked a little bit about the defensive backs. I'm gonna drop some of this. One thing interesting in this game was that the Ravens were leading the snap count 32-9. 32-9 after their 4th drive and 4th touchdown, and a 9 and out basically from the Detroit in their first 3 drives. And for the rest of the game, they were outsnapped 63-23. Some of that was due to this massive number of 4th down attempts Detroit had in the game. But is there anything to be taken from that concerns you even slightly?
Not really. I think probably just the natural variance of a game like this, right? I mean, obviously, did the Ravens have I don't think they had a 3-and-out with Lamar on the field, right?
They had a fumble. I think you're right. I don't think they had a 3 and out. I'll check it real quick, but
yeah. So to me, it was just, again, like the Lions needing 4 downs seemingly every single time that they were looking for a first down and going for it. And sometimes they got it and sometimes they didn't. But yeah, even if it became a concern in terms of just the disparity in total snap count, I know that the Ravens were getting in the Jalen Armour Davises of the world into the game late in that fourth quarter. So whatever, if guys were puffing and heaving, then they probably weren't playing a whole lot because the game was over and the Ravens had a good opportunity to get some of the guys at the bottom of the depth chart into that game.
Yeah, that was nice. You always hope for those games to try and get your backup linemen in, to try and get your backup defenders in. Yeah. The Ravens got everybody in. They really did. In fact, kind of surprisingly, they left Ronnie Stanley in the game. But I did want to talk about the fourth down attempts because it was really nearly a historic game. Detroit went for it on fourth down 6 times in this game, and they weren't short distance things. I think it was like 1, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 15. Now I'm missing one, 10 also. 10 and 15. And the time they went on 4th and 15, there was a holding call. It was actually the 7th time, and it would have tied the NFL record for the most times anybody's been for it in a game since 1991. But I did come up with an interesting stat on this that the teams, it's fortunate this is StatHead working for you. The teams that went for it 7 times previously went 0-6. The teams that went for 6 times, it's happened 27 times now, 1-26. And the teams that went for it 5 times, 11-87 in those 98 games. So that's not a good thing, obviously, to go for it on 4th down.
No. In terms of esoteric stats, it looks like the Ravens are unsurprisable. Maybe a little bit surprising that they're not elite. They are, according to teamrankings.com, 9th in 4th down defense. So they are allowing just 38.46 conversion rate, which is behind Pittsburgh, behind Cincinnati. So they're not even top 2 in their division. But again, small sample size, beware. I
think so. That's 13, 5 out of 13 they've allowed if it's 0.385. So that's not much. Anyway, I'm loving what the Ravens have done. The Ravens inside the 10, their goal to go defense now, they're down to 2 for 8 allowed on the year. They were already leading the NFL at 2 out of 7, but that's really special. And the Tennessee, I don't know if you saw the statistics on that, but they'd had a historic run of converting their goal to go opportunities to make it's either 23 out of 24 or 24 out of 25 over about a year and a half, and the Ravens shut them down with 0 for 2.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to talk about their defense because there was a story in The Athletic ahead of that Ravens Cincinnati game in week 3 about how elite Cincinnati's like second half goal line defense. It was this very, very granular stat, but it was obviously inspired by the Tyler Huntley incident in the playoffs last year. But the Ravens were able to ultimately convert, I think, a couple times in the red zone against Cincinnati. So whatever good juju Cincinnati had, the Ravens were ruined with that trip to Cincinnati.
Good to hear. That was a miserable night, I can tell you, after that game. It was no fun being in Cincinnati and having to travel the next day. Did you travel to the road games for like the Cincinnati playoff game?
Yep. I was there.
Okay.
That was that was the game more notable for J.K. Dobbins. When I shouldn't say more notable, but that was the game that was just as notable for J.K. Dobbins going scorched earth, I guess I should say, on the Ravens coaches for not feeding him the ball in the red zone and for the Ravens not putting Lamar Jackson in at quarterback instead of Tyler Huntley. That was, gosh, I miss J.K.
Yeah.
Healthy J.K. and come back to Baltimore.
Chance he'll be back next year? Just offhand, give me a probability.
I don't know. I'd say like 10%, 20%. I don't know if with all the enmity that is kind of built up between him and this front office, between him and this organization with how they handled his rehab and playing him in the preseason. I imagine he probably wants a clean break and, couldn't begrudge him for wanting to leave.
Okay. All right, fair enough. I think the chance is actually higher right now that he'll be back than it was had he had a really good season. I think if he had a good season, he's certainly gone. I think his chance now, sure, the Ravens can make up with a lot of players, and they've shown it over the years how good they are about accepting their own back into the fold. And I probably would say higher, but I respect your call on that. Yeah. I don't want to spend a lot of time on packages this week, but I do want to get to it and just say the Ravens only had 2 packages they run in the whole game. And Jonas and I have had discussions about packages before. We had that discussion a few years ago where we did some various analytics things at a restaurant. And one of the things I wanted to discuss was some various Ravens packages. And back then, they had about a dozen packages they'd run in 2018, which was the year we were looking back at. Now it's basically they run all base or nickel, and they don't have any real permutations on that. Like you might, the Martindale had that, what some teams call penny, but it's basically a 3 down lineman with 1 inside linebacker nickel. They don't run that here anymore. They barely run a rush nickel where they put a 3rd outside linebacker on the field because so far this year they really haven't had the bodies to do it. So it's all basically these 2 packages, and it makes my article a lot less interesting every week to be talking about that.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll see Tyus Bowser back. And correct if I'm misinterpreting the packages, construction, Ken, but like we saw Owe line up inside a couple times. We saw Clowney reduce a couple times. But, Clowney's a good inside rusher. I think Owe's improved as an inside rusher. We know that Tyus, when he's healthy, has the strength to kind of bully guards with that speed to power combination. So it's been surprising, honestly, to see Michael Pierce play as much on 3rd down as he has. I think he's done a good job. I think he's performed admirably for a guy who's playing as much as he is, who's playing as much as he has at the weight that he's carrying. But it will be interesting to see, if and when they get as healthy as they desire, what their preferred like 3rd and long 4-man front will be. I imagine Justin Madubuike, you can kind of write him in, but is it going to be him next to Clowney, next to Owe, next to Bowser? I would imagine they will probably keep it to like 290 to 300 pounder at a time. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to go super heavy unless they really feel like there's a matchup advantage with Michael Pearson there. But it is going to be interesting if and when Tyus comes back, and if and when David Ojabo, kind of rises to the level that we know he's capable of. But I think that's something that I'm excited to see.
Yeah, that would speak towards Tyus is the edge rusher you acquire at the trade deadline. And to me, he's the most significant because he brings the Ravens something they do not have right now, and that's the ability to drop a really good cover guy. And for my money, he was, when he last played, and admittedly now it's been a while, but he's the best coverage outside linebacker in the entire NFL. And it dropped 32% of his NFL snaps. And that's compared to Clowney, for example, has dropped 3% of his NFL snaps in terms of coverage. So Tyus is the guy you want back there. And he gives you all sorts of flexibility to blitz off the slot, blitz from level 2, even blitz a safety that they don't have right now.
And I guess this is a testament to Clowney's willingness to be part of the team and to the coaches for teaching it. But I remember when they acquired Clowney, and I was admittedly very, very down on his prospects of being an impactful edge rusher on the outside this year. But I looked at his pass coverage snaps from Cleveland last year, and like the 3 or 4 times that he did drop into coverage, it was like all in the red zone, where he was like, yeah, you just need to drop back 5 yards and then you're good to go. Whereas, here in Baltimore, they've had him do it at the 30, they've had him do it at the 40 near midfield, and he's looked capable. I mean, obviously, he is not the athlete that he was when he was drafted first overall, but he is still a very, very special mover athletically, and I think you see that the few times that they've asked him to drop into coverage.
Yeah, size guy, no doubt about it. He's at 4%. He's up from 3 to 4% in Baltimore. 9 out of 228 here. So it's an interesting kind of a comparison. All right. When I say anything about this otherwise, the team's only played 3 dime snaps. That's always something that sticks in my craw. In the post Patrick Queen era, that's something I think that they're going to look to do is go back to more platooning at that weak side linebacker role. Pretty much no matter who it is. Now, it could be Simpson ends up being being more Queen-like in terms of his ability to adapt over time as a coverage player. But I think that, if the team is able to bring the kind of safeties they always have been able to find to the table, they're probably going to have a really good guy to play that dime spot when they want it.
Yeah. Do you know offhand like how many snaps they've had with Geno and Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton lining up on the field together?
Three total. No. Oh, hold on. What you're asking, they have had a lot of nickel snaps with that exact alignment. Okay. With Worley on the field on the back end and Hamilton in the slot. They've had plenty of that, but actually replacing Queen with a safety is what I'm talking about. Right. So, you could, if you had Hamilton on the field, you could call that a 4 safety look if you wanted to, but I just call Hamilton a traditional nickel for purposes of this analysis. Yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit about the pass rush. Then we'll take a break here and come back. Modest numbers from McDonald in this game. Let's see, I think it was 48 out of 58. He rushed 3 or less. Let me bring up my stats here so I've got it in front of me. And let's see. Yeah, one time with 3. That might have been the very first play of the game. Then 47 with 4. Again, 4 sacks and 3.8 yards per pass when you're rushing 4 men. I cannot help but continue to gawk at how those statistics have been the entire year.
It's really impressive. I mean, they're doing such a good job with their simulated pressures, with their creepers. Next Gen Stats keeps track of like the number or the I guess what percentage of plays someone drops from the line of scrimmage into coverage, and it would not surprise you, Ken, to know that the Ravens are right at the tippy top. I think they're first, second, or third thereabouts. There is no player on this. There's no player who takes the field who isn't a threat to go left, right, up, down. I mean, it is just like a video game out there in a lot of ways. One thing we saw in this game that was really special, we saw 2 double cat blitzes, but both the outside corners blitzing. Yes. Let's talk about those. Go ahead. Well, how many times have they? I remember they did that in the blowout of the Rams. Ironically enough, it was another 19. Yeah. Another just absolute woodshed game. But the one double corner blitz that stuck out to me was the one that yielded the 2-yard sack by Van Noy, where he kind of runs Jared Goff out of the picture. But even that one was kind of strange, not least because it's Michael Pierce dropping into the middle hook. But it was almost, you had Marlon Tarrant off one side looking like, he knew that it was a seek and destroy mission for him. But for Brandon Stevens on the other side, it was kind of weird because he was almost playing it like it was a green dog blitz, because he was kind of staying to engage that wide receiver or tight end doing like the speed out to the side. And then and only then did he actually take a route to the quarterback. So he was able to actually breach the pocket eventually and be a part of that party that hunted Goff down. But it was very strange to see like you said, a 2-cat double cornerback blitz, but one side be asynchronous, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good point. Usually it's a narrow formation on the offense that can trigger that call, and then you end up sending both guys, and they are screaming like banshees because they got to have a replacement coverage guy on each of those receivers, and that's of course a big risk. Of course, one thing you're sure when you rush from both outside corners is no matter what that quarterback's doing, including any sort of boot, play action, whatever, he's going to see one of them right away. So that's the good thing is if it's Jared Goff, he gets nervous because he sees color. And that's always been something about Goff. And I think it's one of the reasons they really brought him back down to earth in this game was they showed him color pretty much the whole game in terms of stunts, in terms of some of the off-ball blitzes, which they didn't do a ton of. I mean, they had 58 dropbacks.
and they only had 15 off-ball blitzes. That's not a ton at 0.26 per play. And it's been over half a per play in some games, but only 3.1 yards on those, including the Stone interception. The big thing was stunts. And some of these can be called on the field, but I have a feeling a lot of these were called pre-snap in this game. 20 total stunts in this game, 8 singles and 6 doubles. And I want to get your opinion on this, Jonas, but it looked to me like they were trying to create opportunities for the underneath player to then peel off one of the 2 blocks on him. And a lot of times that was Madubuike going underneath.
Yeah, well, I mean, that first pressure, or I guess the first sack of the game with Madubuike, right, where he just kind of slips in. It looked to me, and this is just good coaching, that they were going after that backup left guard. Obviously, the Lions without Jonah Jackson. Shout out to anyone who's named Jonah or Jonas or any permutation close to thereof. But yeah, I mean, this is a very well-schooled Lions offensive line. I think, PFF had them top 2, top 3 coming into this game. The level of the execution from the stunts and twists that we were seeing in the preseason, where it just looked so pedestrian and slow motion, and it was just like watching mold grow. Just the rate at which, the pace of play at which those guys are playing to now, where it's Madubuike and it's Patrick Queen getting in the mix with whatever name you have for that tried and true staple, where he's lining up in the A gap and taking on the guard so he can free Madubuike or whoever it is coming up the middle. I mean, it just looks so much faster than it did in the preseason, which is understandable because these are the starters. But still, I was very, very down on the pass rush plan for Mike Macdonald, because they were blitzing so much in the preseason and they were not getting home. And now they are not blitzing very much. They are getting home twice as often. So it's a really real big credit to them. But yeah, I mean, just a very, very creative use of just how these guys were lining up. And I mean, I think you probably studied the stunts and twists better than I did. So if you want to speak on any kind of plays that stuck out, I can maybe piggyback off you.
Maybe we'll just talk about the very first one that you mentioned before, because it was definitely an attempt to get Madubuike in between the in between the guard and the tackle, I believe, or maybe it was the guard and the center. Let me bring it up right here for a second. Yeah, it was in the right A gap that he set the pick, and then he beat the center inside when Pierce looped around and forced the guard to pick him up. And that's oftentimes, it's a little misunderstood, but people think it's the looper on a stunt that sometimes gets a good opportunity. Oftentimes the underneath player, because he gets 2 45-degree angle blocks against him effectively by 2 players who next. And his job is just to squeeze into the corner there. And all of a sudden you get one of those guys released and you got a big opportunity to get to the quarterback very quickly. So Tim Jernigan was a guy, Pernell McPhee were guys who really took advantage of that extremely well in Ravens history. But this is a special situation. I think we're going to see Madubuike as the under. He's got all the quickness you would need to be the looper. So he could do that if you want him to. But he's also just seems incredibly tweaked up, torqued up, whatever you want to call it, in terms of his ability to put a powerful move on either side of his body to get to the quarterback once that pressure is relieved from one side.
We can maybe table this for the individual player discussion, Ken. But if we want to touch on it, if we want to get into it right now, where are you on the Justin Madubuike is getting to elite conversation?
I'm not concerned with that conversation at all. I think he is proving it right now. Penalties early in the year had to be really concerned about how Zier had started out, but he's fixed that. And now he's rushing the passer like no other interior defensive lineman in the game, or only a couple of others, if you want to include Chris Jones maybe as being his equal. But Aaron Donald is not this year. I think he's just very special. And I don't think the Ravens can re-sign him if that's where we're going with this discussion. But again, this is where are you on that?
No, that is, I guess, my my unpopular opinion is that he is an incredible closer, he's an incredible finisher, but on a down-to-down basis, I don't think he is yet at that level that would deserve like bank-breaking money. You know what I mean? Like
I'm there with you.
I think Seth Walder, who does great, data analytics and data viz for ESPN. This was like it's a couple weeks old at this point, and Justin's had a couple great weeks in the time since. But like, he put a chart out basically of the qualifying interior pass rushers, and it was like, one axis was double team rate, the other one was I think win rate or pressure rate, and Justin was like very, very low on both in terms of he wasn't getting double team very often, nor was he getting wins very often. And I wanted to kind of double check that against PFF, and just kind of set a random threshold for pass rush snaps among interior defensive linemen, and ended up with a sample of I think about like 60 or so with enough qualifying snaps. And again, he was like right in that 50th percentile in terms of PFF's pass rush win rate, which was confusing because this was probably closer to him, having the nice couple sack performances. So I am curious to see if we are going to see that pressure rate match the sack rate, or if we're going to see the sack rate fall down to where the pressure rate is.
It'd be an interesting call. I'll tell you, PFF and I use a different definition of pressure. And I have a 3 second standard. They have a 2.5. So I had Madubuike for 5 pressures in this game in total. They also give the player credit for a late pressure. If he gets a pressure within 3 seconds and the quarterback has to move, that's a pressure as far as I'm concerned, even if he is forced out of the pocket where he then has time to make a throw. But if you get that quarterback flush, generally I call that a pressure. The other thing is I have more distinctive definition of what the cone is, and denying the quarterback the ability to step into his throw is a very big deal. Sure. So we had Travis Jones in particular had a bunch of those pressures in this game. But anyway, Madubuike, I think, has done a lot of that. And if you look at how the Ravens have really been successful, they've had a lot of schemed up pressures. In particular, the slot corners have had 6 sacks this year, which is, you look at positions in the NFL, and they've only had 30 pass rush attempts that got 6 sacks. But they've had some wonderful schemed up blitzes like that have gotten home. But they've also, most of their sacks are of the compound variety. I mean, they get somebody to get that initial pressure, get in the cone, get that quarterback to move, and then somebody else cleans it up. They don't have one-on-one pass rush winners that have looked really great. I don't think Madubuike is that. I don't think Oweh is that. I don't think Clowney is that. And I don't think Van Noy is that, even though they're all have great aspects of getting initial pressure sometimes and closing sometimes. None of them is Aaron Donald, TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson, any of those guys.
Yeah, I do think Oweh could be there. I think I was really impressed by what he did against Tunsil in week 1. And for him to, like I said, beat Decker a couple times and beat Sewell that one time for the hold at less than 100%. I think we're starting to see him finally break out and emerge. And I don't know if he's going to, if his end of season sack totals will be that of a 10 sack guy. If you just kind of braid it out,
right. Yeah.
As a, if you discount the games that he lost to injury, but I do think that he is like the most talented pure pass rush guy on this team. Maybe right up there with Madubuike, who, after looking at PFF right now, is like 16th in true pass sets pressure rate among interior defensive linemen, which is pretty good. He's like in the company of Ed Oliver, Christian Wilkins, behind Michael Pierce still. Mm-hmm. But he's not at the Jeffrey Simmons, Javon Hargrave, Chris Jones level, obviously.
Yeah. All right, outstanding stuff. It's always great to talk football with you, Jonas. I know we've run a little long here. We'll come back for part 2, but I want you to tell people where they can find you online and maybe talk football with you if they have a question to ask you or whatever.
Yeah, just BaltimoreBanner.com. I believe it's $1 for 6 months. The usual get you in cheap so we can get you for longer type deal. We have a Banner Ravens podcast, which you can find on Apple and on Spotify. We do after every game, and then a preview pod on Thursdays. I'm sure we love to have you on one of those, Ken, at some point. I don't really do a good job of checking my mentions. So if you want to send me a hate mail or a letter of thanks, you can just send it to my email, or just try to reach out to me over DMs, or you can just bug Ken to pass on the message.
I'll do my best. Sometimes I have trouble getting through to him by DM as well, but I'll just say this: Jonas is one of the most fun people to spend time with at camp. He's very cerebral, and you pick up on this from the discussion, of course. But we can sit there and we can talk football, and you sometimes have to watch yourself when you're at camp, because you're really there to watch the field, and you talk to some just very interesting football people, and that's somehow you can lose time in the conversation, certainly with Jonas, when that happens. But great football guy, and always fun to talk to. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, you hit me up with a DM on Twitter. They're always open. I will respond to you very quickly and talk through your kernel of an idea, and hopefully you can make a show out of it. I think one thing I'll just advise is try and keep the topic a little bit narrow and siloed, so we can get through it in about 20 to 30 minutes, because that's the goal of the short series, is to have some alternatives that are shorter content to draw people into the Film Study podcasts, and then get him listening to the longer ones, which people are naturally resistant to listening to a longer pod. Jonas, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks again, and I hope that our extended discussion of the Ravens cover zero disaster against Miami doesn't preclude people from doing a short podcast themselves, because it is rich ground. It's fertile territory.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.